Years ago, at one of the churches we were in a military town for many years, Travis Air Base area. And there were people from all over the world. And there were many people of mixed marriages, of different races, because airmen would be stationed in different places and then marry folks. And next door to me was a colonel, Clint or Cliff next door, and retired fellow. And he passed away, and we went to the memorial service, and he had 5 children. And of the 5 children, I think at least 2 of them were in the military, and one of them was a woman who was in the Air Force. And she was very Japanese. Her mom was a native Japanese person, and the daughter was Japanese, and she had been promoted in the Air Force as a colonel. And she told me a story which is very relevant to this passage about crossing cultural lines. She said that my job is to negotiate treaties or negotiate conditions with other countries. And she said, I'm a specialist especially in going to the Middle East and negotiating with Arab countries. This was back during the Iraq War. She said during Arab countries, sometimes we need to the friendly Arab countries, we need to use them as staging points for weapons to the war. And she said, even though I'm a woman, which she said is crossing a large cultural boundary in an Islamic country, she said, I've never failed in a negotiation because I am half Japanese and I know how to think differently than Westerners. And I said, how? She said, well, Westerners, when they negotiate, typically, they come to the Arab country when officers come here who've been raised in the West, and they are very forceful and tell the folks, we are going to get what we want because we have the power, we have the presence, and this is how it's going to happen, and we just need to work out the details. And she said, Westerners see that as telling the truth, as being upfront, as being transparent. But she said, when I show up, she said, I come in and I just meet with them. I have tea with them. I review their areas. They tell me about their place. And she said, these people are not foolish. They're very intelligent. So I respect their intelligence by believing they know what I want and they know why I'm there, and they do. And she said, usually by the 3rd day, and she said, I'm very calm. I just meet with them. I just respect them and show that I respect them. And she said, by the 3rd day, they typically say, you have what you need. Without us we are going to grant you what you request or what you need. Now, the reason I tell that story is because this story is about, it's about several things. It's about cultures that are very, very different and about pride and humility. This Japanese colonel who lived next door to us was very humble. She was willing to listen to others. She was willing to respect others. She was willing to see their point of view rather than inflicting her point of view on them. And it built a bridge rather than a wall. In our story today, we have 2 people, Elisha and Naaman, who are from very different cultures, from very different backgrounds, from very different nationalities. And what kept them apart in many ways was pride, because pride builds walls, but they're both converted to humility by the end of the story. And of course, I've listened to Dr. Wayne's sermons online when we've been home in Santa Cruz, and I'm glad he's not here because he might get prideful if I tell him how great they were. They were the man can preach. He can really, really preach. So anyway, Eliza was prideful because there was one incident when he was young where some youths made fun. This is in the Bible. Youths made fun of him, called him Baldy. And for that, he sicked a bear on them, and a bear mauled them. I mean, that's really being upset about your hair problem. You know what I mean? And so Naaman, the Syrian, was very prideful because his name means, I am, in Hebrew, I'm self-contained, or I am a consultant to myself. In other words, I ask myself the questions, I get the answers, and I know what to do. He was very prideful in that way. And Naaman was an enemy of Israel because he was involved in the trafficking of children for domestic help. He had captured a young Israelite woman. Okay, now so far we have two fairly prideful characters, people who are distant and far apart, both in language and culture and background. But this young, humble servant girl bridges the gap through humility. And Wayne talked about that, how humility bridges gaps between people. And so we also learned that Naaman was an all-star in the Syrian army. He was a great warrior, a problem solver. He had FaceTime with the king of Syria whenever he wanted it, and he was as handsome as Adonis. But, like all heroes, he had a fatal flaw. It says, but he was a leper. Incurable disease at that time, you know. And so, but the power and charm of his personality is apparent. But the slave girls, if you're a proud person, you're put off by people who have a lot of charm and personality. The slave girl was not. She enjoyed Naaman, and so she told him that in Israel he could be cured. So the king of Syria writes a letter to the king of Israel and gives him a lot of money. I mean, I calculated earlier, but it's like millions of dollars. Heal this guy. This is my top general. Heal this guy. And the king of Israel rips his clothes to shreds and wanders around the halls of the castle that way with his clothes shredded. And he said he's seeking an opportunity to make war with me. Okay, then that's when our next major player, Elisha, his name means God is my salvation. Now, his name means God is my salvation, and Naaman's name means I am self-contained, consultant to myself. Hebrew names were like Indian names. They had a real meaning, you know, like walking arrow or talking feather or that kind of thing. So Naaman, with a full chariot retinue, pulls up to the door of Elisha, of the prophet. Now, you have to remember that Israel was in the Stone Age, and they did not like chariots. And so this would be equivalent to us having a full National Guard tank squad pull up outside the door of the church. And it would shake all the, you know, the doors, and there'd be thunder and so Elisha, now my wife and I had a debate about this. I thought this was rather prideful. He didn't come out to talk to Naaman. He sent a servant out. And Lorraine said, well, he did send him out. So we both were, Lorraine and I were both prideful because we both felt we were right. As Wayne said, that's one sign of being prideful. You always think you're right, and you always think the other person is prideful. So then Naaman's pride is offended because the prophet doesn't talk to him, and he's asked to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. The Jordan is muddy and slow moving and small. And he makes a very good point. He said, could I not wash in the rivers of Damascus? The rivers of Pharpar and Abana. Okay, he asked, are Abana, the river of Abana, these are both mountainous rivers, because Abana means stones or rocks plummeting. So they're fast flowing, clear and pure mountain rivers. The same with Pharpar, which means to run swiftly and to break into pieces. It's such a raging current that it smashes rocks and trees and so forth. And Naaman is going, the Jordan is a joke. I'm not, washing in there is not going to do anything for me. So one of his servants, or all of his servants together who are humble, say, Father, they say, you're a problem solver. They appeal to his ego. They appeal to his pride. You're a problem solver. You can do anything, And if the prophet had asked you to do something difficult, like climb some mountain or go on some war assignment, you would do it because that's who you are. So what if he asked you to do something small? Is that so difficult? So Naaman swallows his pride and listens to someone else. It's the first start of building a bridge. And he is miraculously cured. And his flesh, it says his flesh becomes like that of a little child or a baby, the leprosy. Now think about that. That's powerful. So then Elisha and Naaman talk. A bridge has been built. They've both been humble. Elisha has asked him to come and healed him, even though he's an enemy of Israel. Naaman has done what Elisha said. They've both broken their pride a little bit. So now they've built a bridge between each other, and they're talking. And Naaman says this. He said, now, Naaman, 5 times in these next 2 paragraphs, says to Elisha, I am your servant. 5 times. This guy's the top military commander. And 5 times he says to the prophet, who's kind of a hippie, I am your servant. And he says, now I know, this is Naaman, now I know, and the know is in the perfect tense in Hebrew, means I really, truly, completely, and deeply know I've been converted to, we have some linguists out here, so they know about the perfect tense, that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept, it says please accept there, but it's imperative tense. Once more, we have some linguists who know what imperative means. A gift from your servant. And this prophet will not accept it. Then an incredible thing happens. Naaman says, if you will not, please let me, and this is the first time he says, your servant be given as much earth as a pair of mules may carry. For your servant, second time, will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. Notice the gentle humility of this request. He's not only healed in body, but healed in soul. Then he continues, may the Lord forgive your servant. Notice how he addresses Elijah as servant. For this one thing, when my master enters the temple of Rimmon, now Rimmon was the god of the Syrians, and Rimmon was a god of thunder, but he was a monotheistic god, but he was still an idol, so the Israelites would have been very against such a god. All through the prophets especially, Elijah, who was the mentor of Elisha, was fighting idol worship all the time. That was his thing, to fight idol worship. And it was just not tolerated in Israel. But he makes this request. He said, when my master enters the temple of Rimmon, when the king, to bow down, he's leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also. May the Lord forgive your servant. He says servant again for this. Now, a little suspense there. What would Elisha answer? No Israelite prophet would endorse idol worship. But he's saying, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. And Elisha says, go in peace. Go in peace. He swallows his pride, and there's a peace bridge. I started the sermon, a bridge of peace. And in Hebrew, shalom means relationships which have mutual benefit for all parties involved. Peace in our language means something like, we can say rest in peace, like a person who's passed away. Peace is if nothing's happening. In Hebrew, peace or shalom in the language is a dynamic of relationships that work out to mutual benefits, even if they're not what we would call peaceful. They're kind of, negotiation and back and forth. But he says, go in peace, and he lets them go. So that is a powerful thing. And years ago, when I was interviewed for a church in a resort town, they asked me, how would we get young people in the church? I was going to be the new pastor, and they interviewed me. And I had lived in a resort town, and I was young. I said, well, I've lived in a resort town, and I was young. So I know the one challenge you have is that young people in a resort town work on Sunday. So you have to have a second service on another day, or they won't be able to come. And I remember the committee said, they're not real Christians if they don't come on Sunday. I said, well, they can't, they're marginalized. People who work in resorts are often marginalized, they're often young, they often live somewhere else. If they quit their job, they're going to have to move out of the area, so that's not going to work. But you see, the group was kind of prideful. Now, I've been just as prideful in things I've done. I was a new church development, I worked with a Latino church, and I always thought, looking back on it, I always thought kind of my way was the right way to do things, and it wasn't. So, pride builds walls. Humility builds bridges, peaceful bridges. And the early church made this passage a communion text, because in communion it says, there's no longer slave nor free, male nor female, a Greek nor Jew, neither is there soldier nor prophet, Latino nor white, Japanese nor Westerner. In communion, we all come together. Or in the baptism, we all come together. And in communion, we all dine at the same table. So those are the bridges of peace. And I want to thank Wayne again for laying a groundwork for my sermon. It really helped.